So I went up to him. Can I stand up? No.
Yes.
Went up to him. Stood over like that. Like that. I did him first there. I've done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing and laughing and laughing louder and louder.
Snapchat is not very smart.
Varför får det vara now we have people on the phone and outside in the car now? Because of that Snapchat thing, it's all over, you're all over the internet network, social media.
It's on social media. The body from stay when we have to get on this. Just for your well safety.
I've never even heard of something so horrific as this. It's just, it shocks the mind, shocks the soul.
Every child makes a mistake from time to time. It's a part of learning and growing up. But normally those mistakes are pretty simple when you're a child. Maybe you stole a candy bar from a convenience store or cheated on a spelling test. Rarely do children do things so horrible that they are considered hardened criminals. Even more rarely does a child make a mistake so evil that it could end up landing them on death row. The following are stories of some of the most deadly children to either end up in this position or get terrifyingly close to it.
It's to death.
Because of your youth, though, you also have no concept of death.
A 19-year-old from Warren County, now the youngest person on death row in Ohio.
The idea that he has no worth or value as a human being, so better off euthanized.
For the brutal murder of a friend.
On January 28, 2014, two 19-year-old men named Austin Gregory Myers and Timothy E. Mosley brutally took the life of 18-year-old Justin Michael Back in Warren County, Ohio. Their motive? They wanted to steal a safe that was in the Back family home, and Justin was merely standing in their way. Justin was not a stranger to these teens. In fact, Timothy had attended school with Justin for years and considered him during childhood to be a good friend. But somewhere after his graduation from high school, Timothy's loyalties to Justin must have changed. Austin reportedly approached Timothy and asked him if he was interested in making some extra cash. But they weren't going to be getting this cash through a side job. They were going to steal it. They considered two options. They could rob a local drug dealer, or they could attempt to steal the money from Justin's stepfather, Mark Cates. They knew that Mark had a significant amount of money locked in his safe, and they came up with an elaborate plan to break in and steal it. It wasn't going to be enough for them to just break in and steal the money. They wanted to cover up their tracks as well. So they decided that they would kill Justin, cover up the mess, remove his body, and then take the safe. This way, they could make it look as if Justin was the one who had stolen from his stepfather and then make a run for it. They waited until they knew that Justin was the only one home. They then knocked at the door. Justin, who suspected nothing of their visit, let them into the home. They all chatted for a while, until Timothy eventually saw an opportunity to ambush Justin from behind. Meanwhile, Austin helped tackle him to the ground. He then reached for the sharp object he brought as a weapon and used it to brutally kill the teenager. Once Justin was dead, the teens made their priorities clear. They went through the house and stole what they could, including the safe and some jewelry. They also took some of Justin's clothes to make it look like he had packed to run away. It wasn't until after they had already finished with this that they worked on cleaning up the scene of the crime. They loaded Justin's body into one of their vehicles and then used ammonia to clean up the mess inside the house before fleeing the scene. After they had disposed of Justin's body in a remote area, the teens were eager to check their loot. But much to their disappointment, when they were able to break the safe open, there was no cash in it at all. Only some of Mark's paperwork was inside. The teens burned everything they couldn't use and returned home. When Justin's stepfather returned home later that day and realized that several of his belongings were missing, he called law enforcement. But when they arrived at the scene, they quickly began to suspect that something much more serious than a teen swiping some things and running away had happened. Security footage revealed that there was a strange car parked outside of the home around the time the robbery had likely taken place. That vehicle was traced back to Austin Myers. Both he and Timothy Mosley were later brought into the headquarters for questioning. Justin's body was found not long after. Both of the teens tried a variety of different made-up stories, each trying to pin the killing on the other. Ultimately, they were both charged and convicted for killing Justin. Timothy was able to land a plea deal that landed him life in prison without parole, but Austin was not so lucky.
Two families in court, one to see justice carried out for their son's death,
the other one to beg for their son's life to be spared.
Justin's mother addressed her son's killer in court.
Austin could have stopped it, but tells Justin it's okay, it's almost over. You could have changed your mind many times, but you didn't. Especially when Justin was begging for his life.
Austin was sentenced to death. He remains on death row, awaiting execution as of September 2023. There are certain countries that take illegal substances a lot more seriously than others. In the United States, if you're caught with a hardcore illegal substance, you're likely to be going to do some jail time. But the death penalty certainly wouldn't be on the table for this alone. But in other countries like Bali, they are less forgiving. 19-year-old Manuela Vora de Araújo Farias was caught trying to smuggle 7 pounds of an illegal substance. This Brazilian woman's motive is not like anything you would expect. She was reportedly desperate when she agreed to work with a gang to obtain the illegal substance. The gang allegedly told her about a Buddhist temple where you can go and pray to ask for healing. Because Manuela's mother had recently suffered a stroke, she believed that if she could get access to this temple, she would be able to help heal her mother. But her efforts almost cost her her life. Bali does not mess around with crimes like these, and Manuela is expected to be sentenced to death. But instead, officials decided that she would be sentenced to a long time behind bars instead. It will likely be at least 12 years, but her next trial date is still upcoming. Muirhata Quiarsis is a South Arabian activist. He was just 13 years old when he was accused of being part of a terror organization. Despite his young age, he was arrested and placed in solitary confinement, where he was said to have been held for years. The government has expressed their intention to execute him. Muirhata is sadly not the only young boy who has faced death due to an anti-government protest in Saudi Arabia. In fact, he lost his own brother during one of the protests.
The Shia community was protesting against discrimination and incitement against them. What happened in Qatif has led to several boys being sentenced to death, including teenager Mutaja Kueris. The charges against him date back to this night in November 2011.
Officials say that Muirhata, even at a young age, suffered tremendously at the hands of his own government. When he wasn't locked up in solitary confinement, he often faced torture. He was even forced to sign a confession that would lead to his death sentence. His current fate is not known by the public. It's hard to imagine being just a kid and having as little regard for human life as this next teenage killer.
Investigators say Conrad Schaeffer was only 15 years old when he and a group of his friends put up more than a dozen houses in Osceola County. They say he also killed 2 men before being arrested and charged with first-degree murder.
Conrad Schaeffer and his friends went out for a fun night in Osceola County, Florida. Unfortunately, their idea of a fun night involved going on a killing spree, targeting random innocent people whom they had never met. They even ended up taking the lives of 2 people who were both very young. One victim was David Guerrero, who was just 17 years old. He had been getting ready to catch the bus to take him to work. The other victim was 22-year-old Eric Rupinar, who had just been minding his own business when his life was brutally stolen from him. The community was in terror for nearly 2 weeks, as nobody knew who could have been behind these senseless killings. It wasn't until Conrad was finally identified as one of the potential suspects that the case took a turn. He was arrested and charged in connection to both killings. He ended up getting a plea deal and pled guilty.
The family members of the victims are glad he's pleaded guilty, and they're hoping to move forward now.
15 years old. I mean, that's the thing that's hard to wrap your head around. Is this was a 15-year-old who was out, with a semi-automatic rifle, shooting up Osceola County.
Despite taking the lives of 2 people, Conrad was not an adult at the time that this happened, so he could not be sentenced to death. He was, however, sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. He will likely be at least in his 40s when and if he is released from prison. This possibility will depend largely on his behavior behind bars and whether or not a court can be convinced that he has been rehabilitated.
Tonight, a Dothan woman is accused of a crime so horrific, veteran law enforcement officers say it shocked even them. A mother charged with murdering her own baby, placing it alive inside a trash compactor before it was later found dead in a landfill.
This is a crime almost too cruel and disturbing to think about because it was committed against an innocent and defenseless baby. Jaa Williams, an 18-year-old from Alabama, didn't tell her family that she was pregnant. In fact, they didn't even know she had given birth until 10 days after the fact. But what they were told at the time was not the truth. Jaa was reportedly alone on August 13th, 2023, when she gave birth to a baby boy in her bedroom. She later told her family that she had dropped the child off at a local hospital. Her concerned family members went with her to the hospital because they wanted to retrieve the newborn. But when they got there, they were told that no baby had been dropped off. When it was determined that she had lied about where she had brought the baby, law enforcement was brought in to question her. At this point, she was looking more suspicious than ever. Eventually, she admitted that she had never dropped the baby at any hospital. Rather, she had thrown the newborn in the trash. When investigators got to the trash compactor, they were able to find the remains of the child who had tragically been killed. The newborn had been wrapped up and placed into a zipped bag. The sight was so awful that it took a mental toll on those working at the scene. Police Chief Will Benny gave his thoughts on the matter.
I've never even heard of something so horrific as this. It's just, it shocks the mind, shocks the soul.
Jaa reportedly did this because she believed the child would be too expensive to raise. Perhaps one of the most tragic aspects of this story is that it could have been handled so much differently. There was no need for the child to die.
She knew, obviously, that she could take a child, newborn, to the hospital and drop it off. And there's Alabama law that there's no questions asked policy.
Jaa has been charged with capital murder in this case. Because she has confessed to throwing the baby in the trash and is of legal age, she could be facing the death penalty for what she did to her child. The prosecutor in this case said this when he was asked if trying to sentence the teen to death is something he has considered.
That's something that we have not even discussed. That'll be a decision that's made down the road.
For now, as of September 2023, Jaa remains in jail with no bond. It will likely be a while, still, before she learns her fate. Do you think that the state should pursue the death penalty in this horrific case? Or should she get life in prison without parole instead? Let us know what you think in the comments below. It was May 7th, 2019, and the school day was going on as normal at a suburban high school in Colorado. That was until 18-year-old Devin Ericson burst into the school looking to kill as many people as he could. He was not alone in his efforts. He was not alone. He had a co-conspirator named Alex McKinney. Alec would later tell law enforcement that Devin had been planning the attack for a while. He had planned to target people who made fun of Alec specifically because he was transgender. Both Alec and Devin entered separate doors on this tragic day and ambushed their classmates who were watching a movie to celebrate the school year coming close to an end. Luckily, there was a hero on this particular occasion who managed to keep things from going from horrible to even more tragic. His name was 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo. He managed to pin Devin against the wall to keep him from harming his classmates, but in the process, Kendrick was sadly killed, dying a hero. 2 other students were also shot as they worked with Kendrick to take down Devin, but they both survived their injuries. Both Alec and Devin were stopped, and there are no more innocent victims who lost their lives that day. While in court, Alec testified against Devin.
What did you see him doing with the gun?
I saw him waving it back and forth.
When you say waving it back and forth, is that like waving it back and forth like you're waving at somebody, or is he panning around the room aiming at students?
From what I saw, he was panning out around the room aiming at students.
Alec received life in prison with the possibility of parole. While in court, he became emotional and offered a warning to others out there who might be considering carrying out similar evil acts in their own school.
To anyone who is thinking of committing a school shooting, get help now. The amount of pain it causes to anyone who ever cared about you, to the innocent people. Don't be a coward and hide behind a gun. Be brave and learn how to get help.
Because Devin was 18 years old at the time of the killing, he would face a much harsher sentence.
This evening, the young man who killed Kendrick Castillo and injured 8 others was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Devin Ericson was convicted in June on 46 charges, including Kendrick Castillo's murder.
Kendrick's father addressed the media following the sentences. He spoke of the pain his family is feeling, even though they are so proud of what their son did through his courageous actions. Others also share the way this tragedy affected their lives forever.
My wife and I will never have closure. We'll never find peace.
As one by one, families affected by the STEM Highlands Ranch school shooting spoke about how their lives have changed since that day.
I wanted to be able to face Alec the best I could and explain what he's done to our family.
Snapchat is not very similar.
But put it on now, we have people on the phone or house now, no cars now. Because of that Snapchat thing you did. It's all over, you're all over the internet and everywhere. Social media.
It's on social media. You'll probably come stay with me after we get done with this. Just for your well safe being.
It's one thing to kill someone and just hope that you'll get away with it, but it's another thing to kill someone, joke about it on social media, and then still expect to get away scot-free. That's exactly what 14-year-old Aiden Fucci did in the spring of 2021. Aiden, intent on killing someone, got the number of 13-year-old Tristan Bailey. He then convinced her to leave her home and meet him at a friend's house. He then lured her away to a secluded area where he used a sharp object to attack her more than 100 times. He then fled the scene, leaving her behind. Once Tristan's parents reported her as missing, it didn't take long for an interesting security footage to be brought to the attention of law enforcement.
Newly released video by prosecutors shows what they say are the last moments of local teenager Tristan Bailey's life. Investigators say this is Tristan, 13-year-old Tristan, walking with her accused killer, 14-year-old Aiden Fucci.
Not long after, Aiden and a friend of his were picked up by law enforcement so that they could be brought in for questioning. While in the back of the official's vehicle, they posted a Snapchat in which they smiled at the camera and seemed to be poking fun at the entire situation.
Having fun in a cop car. Yep.
Aiden's parents were brought into the station to speak with him. They were clearly distressed and trying to impress upon their son just how bad this was looking for him.
It's very serious.
This isn't a joke, this is your whole life. Your whole life.
And ours.
And ours. And your brothers and sisters. And not for the kid in school. Because the kids will love you.
On Mother's Day, May 9th, 2021, Tristan's body was located, and her heartbroken family members were notified. Aiden was arrested and charged with her death. In court, the judge informed a stone-faced looking Aiden as to just how much trouble he was in.
So let me tell you what you are charged with. You have been indicted by the St. Johns County Grand Jury on the charge of first-degree premeditated murder. That is a capital felony. That is normally punishable by up to death or life imprisonment. In your case, because you are not yet 18 years old, death is not a possible sentence pursuant to the Florida and United States Supreme Courts, but this charge does carry a maximum penalty of life imprisonment.
So, because Aiden was not an adult, he could not be sentenced to death. He was, however, facing the duration of his days behind bars. He ended up pleading guilty, and the judge sentenced him to life behind bars. He called the killing a heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and noted that Aiden had no respect for life. Crystal Lane Smith, Aiden's mom, was also charged in connection to the case because she tried to keep her son out of trouble by washing his clothing that had Tristan's blood on it. She pled no contest to tampering with evidence and was sentenced to 30 days in prison and 5 years of probation. She has since been released.
some of the voices were talking to me. You need to make a sacrifice, or we're going to come and get you. You need to do it. And I saw him. It was laying on the grass. So I felt like that. It was like just fast asleep, where he was drunk. And he goes, "You're the one. He's the one. Do it.
This is the story of James Fairweather of Essex, who was just 15 years old when he took a life for the first time. The first occurrence on March 29, 2014. The victim was a special needs 33-year-old man named James Atfield, who had suffered a brain injury while in a bad car accident. The victim had been drinking on the day he was killed. He then lay down to rest on the grass. When Fairweather spotted him, he ended up approaching him with a deadly weapon, which he used to kill him. When paramedics arrived at the scene, there was nothing they could do to save the man's life. Fairweather had already fled the scene. While it appeared that Fairweather had gotten away with this killing, he still wasn't satisfied. It would only be a few months until he would take yet another life. This time, the victim was a 31-year-old student named Nahid Almina. She had been walking on a trail close to her home when Fairweather ambushed her with a sharp object and killed her. One of the places he wounded her was her eyes. He would later say he did this so she could not see the evil. Law enforcement initially had very little to go off of. They interviewed person after person, including Fairweather. However, he provided an alibi, and they didn't suspect him at the time. It wasn't until over a year later that law enforcement would actually arrest him. Surprisingly, at the time, it wasn't because they suspected him to be connected to the killings. Rather, he was displaying odd psychotic behavior. The teenager was found loitering in town while brandishing a weapon. Believing him to be a danger, officials took him into custody. Through questioning, they would discover he had some very dark and scary thoughts, as well as an obsession with serial killers. He would later be charged with the killings, as well as for carrying an illegal weapon. He said that he was innocent and claimed to be psychotic. In a bizarre and very spooky interview, he described the day when he said voices in his head told him to kill his first victim.
So I went up to him. Can I stand up? No.
Yes.
Went up to him. Stood over like that. I did him first there. I've done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing and louder and louder.
In April 2016, Fairweather was ultimately found guilty by a jury and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 27 years. He tried to appeal the sentence, but was denied by a judge. Some think that Fairweather should have received a death sentence for what he did to these innocent people. Do you believe that he received a just sentence? Let us know in the comments.
Happy Teacher Appreciation Week, Mrs. Graver. Thank you for all that you do in and out of the classroom. We really appreciate how much fun we have in your class and how much Spanish we learn. And we just hope you have a really good day. Gracias.
The sweet message of appreciation that you just heard was a message that a grateful high school student recorded for her Spanish teacher, 66-year-old Noma Graver. Noma was a well-loved student at Fairfield High School from Iowa. Noma was originally from Mexico, but came to the United States with her husband and worked as a teacher for many years. Despite being known as a hardworking and kind teacher who cared about her students, Noma unfortunately found herself as the target of two sadistic and cruel teenage boys who wanted revenge after receiving a poor grade from her. 16-year-old Willard Miller and 16-year-old Jeremy Goodale came up with the heartless plan to take Nohima's life for no apparent reason other than they didn't like her. The teens learned the woman's routine and found out that she would often take a stroll in the park by herself every evening. They then used this information to their sick advantage. On November 3rd, 2021, Noma set out to take her walk like she always did, but this time she would not return home. As it started to get late, her family became increasingly worried about her. They ended up calling law enforcement and reported her as missing. Tragically, her body would be discovered not long after. The teens had used a bat to brutally take the life of the 66-year-old woman, who was no match for them. They then used a wheelbarrow to transport her body, which they later hid under a tarp. She had suffered severe injuries to the head. Just 2 days after Nohima's body was discovered, both Willard and Jeremy were arrested. This was after they were spotted by a passerby near the scene of the crime on the night it occurred. Nohima's van was also seen leaving the area while being driven by two young men. Willard later pled guilty to his role in the killing. Meanwhile, Jeremy tried to pin everything on his accomplice, but noted that he was aware of Willard's plan to kill their teacher. Because neither teenager was of adult age at the time the brutal killing occurred, they could not be sentenced to death, though many people believed they deserved it. It was determined that they would, however, be tried as adults. Prior to his sentencing, Willard addressed the court. Dressed in an orange jumpsuit, he took responsibility for what he did and apologized to the victim's family for the harm he caused. Tragically, Paul Graver, Nohema's husband, passed away before he could see justice served for his wife.
I'd like to take this opportunity to wholeheartedly accept responsibility for the role that I've played in the murder of Noma Graver. I would like to apologize for my actions, first and foremost, to the family. I'm sincerely sorry for the distress that I've caused you and the devastation I've caused your family and all my heart and heart. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry to hear about Paul Graver.
Despite the horrible things he did, Willard appeared very unemotional as he went on to address other parties that he had hurt through his actions. This included the members of Nohema's church, with whom she was very involved. It also included his own family members.
I'd like to apologize to my family. I love you guys so much, and I'm really sorry for what I've done. I'm planning on getting back out there as soon as I can. I'd also like to apologize to the Goodale family. I'm sorry for the position that Jerry's in.
Willard Miller received life in prison with the possibility of parole after 35 years. It wasn't what his lawyer had been hoping for, as he wanted Willard to serve time in the juvenile system instead.
Miller's attorney said his chances at rehabilitation were better in the juvenile system, but the judge said there just isn't enough time to fulfill rehabilitation from such a magnitude of a crime before he ages out of the system at age 18. He's 17 now.
Meanwhile, Jeremy Goodale is expected to be sentenced in November 2023. Do you believe both boys should face the same sentence in this case? Let us know in the comments. Most teenagers would not even dare to think of committing the crimes that those in these stories carried out. It's almost hard to wrap your head around this kind of evil, especially when it was being carried out by just a child. But one thing is for certain, each of these teenagers changed their lives in a moment when they made these tragic decisions. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next video.